Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, it's been a few days since my last video, let me really quickly explain. Now, first of all, I've been able to go to the theme park again, which was really nice. Got to ride some dark rides, basically alone. So that was pretty intense, pretty amazing. And on the other hand, I have finally been able to move. So, a really long story short, with the countries going into lockdown, basically all my belongings were in lockdown in a different country, but I was finally allowed to actually retrieve my items and move them back to where I live right now. So that's why I've been a bit inactive this week. Anyways, though, I still have this episode, so let's get right into it. Let's get building for Magic Towers Resort. So of course, in the last episode, we started working on the American Waterfront area, and I've seen some pretty good name suggestions for both the Entertainment District and the American Waterfront area. I haven't decided upon a name yet. I'll have to go through all of them and just really quickly see what I liked best. So if you have any other suggestions, by the way, for the name suggestions for these areas, do let me know in the comments down below, because then in the next episode I might be able to actually pick a name and just go with that. Now, a bit more about this dark ride. So, in the previous episode, I was already talking about how the queue was going to work and how it would lead to the other side of the area, basically, or at least the other corner, because we didn't have much space behind the entrance there. For this dark ride, though, I wanted to go with a bit more of an exciting dark ride. So I wanted it to be a coaster dark ride. Now, coaster dark rides are a bit different from the usual slow-moving dark rides in terms of both the theming and the layout and pacing of the ride. Now, a really good example, I think, of a coaster dark ride that is incredibly fun and incredibly intense as well is The Mummy at Universal Studios. I believe it's both in Los Angeles and in Orlando as well. And basically, it starts off with some dark ride scenes, then gets into some more intense sections, and during these intense sections, you're mostly in the dark. And this is a pretty common trend for dark ride coasters, I mean. When you're moving around really fast, it does not make sense to spend a lot of money on the theming, because you're not going to be seeing a lot of it. You're going to be moving past it rather quickly, so you may not have to spend as much money and time on designing these areas where you're going really fast. And that's something that I wanted to discover with this dark ride as well. Of course, in a fantasy world, we would like every single ride, even the coaster dark rides, to be as nicely themed as possible. But we're kind of trying to keep it realistic here, and that's what we're gonna try to do with this ride as well. Now, I'm using the boat, the water coaster vehicles for this roller coaster. This may not have been the best idea in the end. I found out that they have a very high friction, and I kind of built my layout for that as well. This is not the final layout yet. I'll be changing it up because I couldn't get it to properly fit. So I just went back a bit and started over and added a block section in the center as well. But in the end, I'm pretty happy with the layout. It feels like a very realistic layout. It's not too intense, but it will be in the dark. You'll be in a smaller vehicle, not a really long coaster train. So I think all in all, this really fits well with the thing that I'm going for. Now, as for the story of this ride, we of course were going for a kind of an ocean theme with this area, but so far we've only stayed on the land. And with this coaster, you will be going under the water. Now, of course, when you're thinking about under the water and some mythology and things like that, you of course start really quickly thinking about Atlantis. And, well, I have to admit, this dark ride is definitely about Atlantis. Now, the ride goes as follows. You exit the harbor by boat. You get into a storm on the sea, which is the little wavy section, like the first really small drop that just gives you the motion of going over these waves. And I'd imagine there to be some light effects to accomplish that, with some thunderstorms and things like that, to really set the theme there. And eventually you get, there's a very large wave that you go under. And at that point you enter a really small launch section that brings you to the top of the coaster. After which you get basically to the entrance to the cave that leads to Atlantis. And that's where you start going through the roller coaster and basically fly through Atlantis. So here I'm building the entrance to Atlantis. In front of that I made sure to kind of theme it as if it is just in the water reef kind of section. But once you're inside of the gates of Atlantis, you'll start to see a lot more man-made structures, though they are kind of overgrown by the sea life that would be underwater basically. So it's a bit more fantastical because of course you wouldn't go in the water with a boat. That's kind of what I liked about this ride, is that even though this entire area is very much set in reality because it is a historical point in time that we're recreating with the area on the surface basically, I do want to go into some more fantastical kind of themes with the rides themselves. So the land basically opens itself up once you start riding the rides, and that's when you really get to see what this area is really about. And I think that's a pretty cool idea. So this coaster is pretty small. Again, because of the very high friction that this coaster has with the track, that means that it can't go quite as far. Additionally, with all the theming in that, we don't really need it to be as long, because this coaster isn't just about the coaster experience, of course. It's also about the theming and the story that it conveys. So the coaster itself is a bit less of a focus basically. So those are things that we can keep in mind as well. Now I kind of sunk this coaster a bit deeper underground. Normally I would try to avoid digging very deeply into the ground, but with a indoor roller coaster it does make sense to do this because of course roller coasters tend to be a bit higher than your average ride, and if you don't build it slightly underground, or at least slightly sunk it into the ground, you'll end up with a humongous show building that will be impossible to hide from everyone's view. I think one really big, or at least two examples, we now have two examples of this in Epcot in Walt Disney World. When you're in Epcot in the park, basically somewhere in the center, and you look over to in the direction of the entrance, kind of look to the left and to the right, you'll notice the very, very large show building of Soarin', which is not a roller coaster, but it's still a ride that takes up a lot of space. It is a humongous show building. And now, as of recently, to the right, you'll also see the show building for Guardians of the Galaxy, which is also a coaster that's also launched and will also be indoors. It is not yet open yet, so I'm very much looking forward to actually seeing what the ride is going to be all about. I'm sure they'll do a really good job of making that a super fun ride, so I'm super excited to ride that someday. But that show building is super large as well. Now, generally what Disney likes to do when they have a coaster like that, they like to have a launch, like to do on the Rock and Roller Coaster, and now the Guardians of the Galaxy as well. And that way they can, while staying very low to the ground, they can get the vehicles as far away from the park as possible, and then have the show building a bit as far away from the park as possible, basically, which means that it will be a lot less noticeable. I'm kind of doing the same here, I suppose, but I don't think this show building will be that large that we'll have trouble hiding it, because in the end it will only be a little bit higher than the facades that we have on the other side of this area. And we have some distance between the facades and, or at least the path and the show building as well, so I think all in all it kind of compensates for it pretty well. So here I start boxing it in. It's always a bit awkward with roller coasters because you tend to have one or two sections where the track is a bit higher than the rest of the track. I didn't want the entire show building to be able to accommodate only this top section basically for the dark ride. So I just made a bit that sticks out on the corner here, and then leads into the show building that is actually a bit lower than the very top part. Because that way we can keep it nice and low, or at least as low as possible. Otherwise we're just wasting a lot of space. And those buildings are probably not, those warehouses are probably not very cheap to build. So I imagine that to be something that you want to keep in mind when building a roller coaster like this. Now, like I said before, this coaster isn't very densely themed. It's mostly just some walls and some vegetation that's kind of trying to kind of go for like an underwater kind of theme here, with some ancient pillars and stuff like that, just to kind of make it appear as if we're building a city here. But with all the lighting in place, of course we don't have that lighting here in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, but with the lighting in place, I'd imagine it to be lit up in such a fashion that you won't actually notice that the walls are just very short sections of walls if lighted properly. But you will be flying right next to these walls at very high speeds, and I think that will make for a pretty exciting ride, even though the ride isn't very overly themed, basically. So that was my idea for this ride. Now we have the brake section at the end there. It mostly just houses some of the additional block brakes to accommodate for more vehicles, just to allow the vehicles to queue both behind the station and in front of the station, just to we have a bit of a buffer in terms of the loading and unloading. One thing, for example, that I really liked about Busch Gardens in Tampa was that their dive coaster, and I feel very stupid for having forgotten the name. Is it Griffin or is it the other one? Anyway, so their dive coaster actually has a block section right after the station. And at the station, they have 2 platforms where they can board people right after each other. So basically what they're doing is they're boarding 2 trains at the same time, dispatching them essentially at the same time as well. But one of the trains will just go to that first block section and the other will actually go up the lift hill. And that basically allows them a bit more wiggle room to then get the empty vehicles back into the boarding platform and start boarding the other ones already, even though usually you would have to wait before the block section in front of the station is actually cleared. In that case, they don't really have to do that, or at least, I mean, they do have to, but they don't have to wait for the entire lift hill to be finished before doing so. Now, of course, we're a bit limited with the theming in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, so to convey these waves being here, I am using some of these glass abstract pieces to kind of get the idea of some waves in there. I think if this were to be a real dark ride, what I would probably do is use some kind of cloth and put that on some metal pillars or something, or hang them from the roofs. Maybe blow some air through them so they are a bit more dynamic as well. And then using some lighting, I think you can get a pretty good effect for some waves in a dark ride. Given that the room is pretty dark to begin with. Of course, we don't have that kind of detail here in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2, so I think the abstract pieces kind of try to convey the same, or at least that's what I'm trying to do. Before you get into these waves though, I created a little island here that you see in the distance, or at least maybe that's still part of the waterfront that you're just passing by before heading out to the sea, basically. Just to have a bit of a calm before the storm moment, really. It's a very short moment, but I think that's important to set the tone. You don't want to start a ride that is just going haywire right from the first second. You need to kind of set the tone, have a calm moment for people to get used to the ride itself, and then you can get into the action. And I think the Mummy at Universal does this really well as well. Of course, you're already kind of set up for the ride in the queue, using some very, very creative television screens that explain what's going on. But once you start the ride, you're basically just pretty chill, kind of exploring the temple for a few seconds before one of the temple rooms just completely bursts out in flames and all the statues start attacking you, and you start moving really quickly to get out of that room, and then the whole thing happens. It is a It was really intense, especially for the first time when I had never done it before and never actually seen it before as well. Or at least the most I would have seen from it was some RC3 recreations back in the day, but that's so many years ago, I don't think I really remembered those anymore. Now, for the rest of the area, I'm gonna start to kind of move away from the facades and incorporate a bit more natural elements into this area as well. And then after that, which is not something that we'll get to in this very episode, I might actually want to try to create a fairground for some of the other rides. And I have some cool ideas, because right now in the park we don't have any shows yet. And of course a theme park like this would definitely have multiple shows inside of the park. And I have some pretty cool ideas for a show that we could put into this area. So we might actually get into that in the next episode. And I think it would incorporate very nicely with the fair that we can create on the corner here. That way we can get some classical kiddie rides in as well. Maybe a merry-go-round, another one. We already have one, of course, but I don't think that matters too much. For example, the slide as well, that would fit very nicely. And we could kind of theme that as a mix between the fairground slide, but also a lighthouse for this water area. I think if we team it cleverly, we can basically achieve both at the same time, and I think that would be a really cool thing to try and do in the next episode, perhaps. And then, of course, we can kind of build the fair around that with some shops, maybe some games as well. And then, of course, also the show. So what I'm kind of imagining right now is some kind of circus type show, but it's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be gonna have some cool effects, I think. That's gonna make it a lot more special than just a circus show, which of course would be kind of boring. Of course, we can build off that in Rollercoaster Tycoon too, but I will talk about how we can try and convey the idea of that in the next episode, probably. Alright, so here I'm just changing up this waterfront because I think I felt like I was kind of going overboard with the man-made waterfront. So instead I kind of wanted to keep the other side a bit more natural as well. I think I actually hinted at that in the previous episode as well. I can't really remember. So yeah, I'm just keeping a bit more space left for some of those natural areas. Here I'm really quickly trying out some different fences, and I eventually found this fence that I quite liked. It felt a bit more, a bit cheaper to make. It will be made out of wood or something, maybe even metal. I'm not sure. But it kind of gives a bit of a more beachy vibe, I think. I kind of like it. Just some trees here and there, just kind of fill it up, and that's kind of about it for the waterfront here. Now, there are a few things that I want to do in Magic Towers overall still. We have a lot of backstage areas that we still have to finish up. Most of the facades and the rides have their backstage basically finished, but in between those there's a lot of dead space right now that I'm not actually utilizing properly. And I think we need to fill those up with some additional warehouses, maybe some kind of break rooms for the staff. There's just a lot of stuff that is going on behind the facade as well that we still don't really have space for, because right now we have really only made space for the rides and the shops and their backstage areas, but nothing for the operations around that themselves. Now on the waterfront here, I did want to break it up a bit, so I'm kind of making this outcrop here, which I would imagine to be a pretty nice seating area, or maybe an area with a really nice view. It could be a really cool photo op, I would imagine. And I'm doing the same a bit further down over there on the corner, just to break up some of the patterns that we had going on. Of course, since I wanted to make this a bit more natural, I think breaking things up like that is a pretty good idea. So yeah, back to the backstage thing. So that could be something that we may want to work on very soon in the future as well. But I think for the next area, I think we will continue with the American waterfront area and maybe already finish that up. Now, if you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments, because I'm always really enjoying reading all the things that you guys are saying, especially with suggestions and things like that, or maybe even information about real theme parks that I may not have talked about. With me actually being able to move my belongings again, I right now have my theme park design book right next to me. I have it in my hands right now. And that's going to be a great resource for this park as well. I was already reading through it a second ago, and definitely had some cool information and bits that I'm going to be able to share in the future as well. Anyways, though, I think that's about it for this episode of Magic Towers Resort. I thank you guys again so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like this video. It really helps me out and allows other people to discover these videos through the recommended videos, which is actually a pretty large portion of you. So if you got here through the recommended videos, make sure to subscribe as well. As long as I can keep growing this channel, I'll continue. So do make sure to follow me along on this journey. Anyways, again, thank you so much, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.